to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Sandeep and Dr. Vivek, who had, coordinated the whole thing. And as I can see, I think there are lots of distinguished dignitaries. So I thank you everyone for joining this evening with us. So I'd like to quickly, share my screen so that we can start off with the presentation. Yes. So is my screen visible for everybody? Yeah. Are you able to? Yes. Okay. So to start off, just as Mr. Sandeep was saying, I head a industrial or a commercial lab which has NDT chemical and mechanical facilities, testing facilities. So we basically do a lot of projects in and around Chennai, where we focus on a lot of new NDT techniques like phased array, and we also involve ourselves in digital eddy current testing and all that. So our most significant project would be the Chennai Metro Rail project, wherein we had to stand with the team for the complete erection of all the columnar pillars in Chennai. And I also happen to be the founder of another company that's called Entrustient. And here we deal with all the IT stuff like we call it as verifiable credentials, where we deal with our certificates and other identities not being given to anybody, which is still under your control. So these are the two organizations where I'm involved, with the administration of both these companies. So typically I would try to go to my slides. Yeah. So I specifically, wanted to pick this topic because, this is a Saturday evening, and if I were to talk about technical and a lot of physics and all that, definitely, probably the participants would get reduced to half. So I wanted to do something that is like more of a decision making. I don't want to make decisions for you. I want you to be in a position where you will be making your own decisions based on the inputs that I'm going to give you today. So I have a level 3 in both. Sorry? Yeah, I have level 3 with the level 3 is a level of certification with both the American Society as well as the British Society. And I also happen to be a radiographic safety officer with the Government of India. And I have done my HR and MBA. So these are my credentials. So I would just go on to the technical presentation. Yes. So the title, the five M's of testing, was kept as a surprise because, it gives you a surprise factor as to, curiosity as to what are the five M's. So this is the presentation slide, and you will have the pane on the left side, like an explorer, which will tell you where we are and what we are currently on right now. So this will help you navigate as to where we are in the presentation. And to start off with, the five M's of NDT, or the non-destructive testing principles, are manpower, mission, material, method, and the money involved. So all these five factors influence the choice of NDT. So we'll be going in detail of each of these topics. And if you were to, head an NDT, or if you want at some point of time involve yourself in an NDT activity or organize an NDT activity, these five factors will help you a lot, in making the right decision. So to start off with, I would like to start with the manpower. So typically, we have a proverb in Tamil that says, "Aal padi, aadai padi," which means like uh, the person, matters more than the other things. So it's like half is your presentation and half is the man itself. So as such, when I talk about manpower in an NDT, it's like, finding a pearl in an ocean. It's easy to say there is no defects in the job, but it's very hard, to actually find a diver who will go and pick that pearl and say, see, here's the pearl in the ocean. So NDT is something like that. The skill of the person is very, very important, to find a defect Whereas 90% of the regular operators will say, okay, this job looks good, but there will be only one operator who will be able to go and find out what exactly or where exactly there is a discontinuity for us to deal with. So basically what is required in a NDT manpower is we need to have a person who has an understanding of what he does. Like suppose, for example, I am operating an NDT equipment. It should be like the NDT mission is listening to me. I should have mastery over of what I'm operating. The mission should be in a position to understand and listen to what I wanted to do. It's not that the mission looks high tech and I just like, keep it on a place and it gives me a result and I like without any verification, I just take this is the result. It shouldn't be like that. It should be the other way around where I know all the parameters of the equipment. That understanding comes from experience. So that goes with like let's say for example we have a production facility and an NDT facility, and the production facility has an issue. So what we require is the person who is dealing with the NDT should know the colloquial terms or the local terms to understand what he is saying. A welder might say a problem with a nickname. So what happens is if we are not able to understand what the problem is, then there is no way the NDT person will go and attend to it. So the core skill of understanding things and communicating properly and having a complete knowledge of what I'm doing is a very important factor in NDT. And the other important thing that usually comes with the NDT is honesty, because when we do an inspection, there is nobody in the area who knows NDT as much as I do. I can always manipulate and say, okay, this looks good or this looks bad. So the honesty of the person involved is very, very important when we consider the manpower. So these are, moral factors or probably, a very basic requirements of an NDT personnel. Having said that, it's more of an ethics basically. So having said that, the technical societies, just like yours, we have certain technical societies which has drafted us certain documents which help, suppose there's an employer who doesn't have any knowledge about NDT and he wants to set an NDT system in his company. So he needs to have some documentations which will help him to, understand or to start off with what are the basic requirements that is required. So these documents like SNTTC, ISO 9712 and CP 189 are documents which help NDT perspective or help an employer, to pick an employer, pick an NDT personnel based on the criteria given in these standards. So it's a recommended practice. We call it as a recommended practice because nobody asks you to mandatorily follow all these. It's just a recommendation. So this recommendation talks about 3 levels, where level 1 deals with the just the operator of the equipment. Level 2 refers to the interpreter of the results, and level 3 defines the higher severity where he needs to take care of the entire NDT management, including drafting, giving SOPs. And the level 3 is a person who actually designates and organizes an NDT activity. He is the coordinator. So there are 3 levels, and these 3 levels are well documented in a document called Return Practice. So I'm sure most of you would know what is a return practice. A return practice just says how many questions should I ask for the trainee to get selected as a level 1, as a level 2, or a level 3? How many hours of training should I give them? What is their responsibility being a level 1, level 2, or a level 3? And how to control the exam or administer training, control the training and qualification. What topics should I take in the class? All these are given in these documents, which is a ready reference for any employer to start off with. So any company looking forward, from an administrative perspective to start an NDT should first get their hands on this written practice and try to understand what are the requirements for a person to get qualified as a NDT personnel. And finally, we have this requirements of NDT is like, to summarize, it's just a few things. You can employ anybody who has a formal education right away. You can employ them as an NDT personnel in your firm if he has a formal education in physics, maths, and chemistry, and has a training and if he's done a 4-year college, then he can have his training hours reduced by 50 hours. And if the person does not have any formal education, if he works for more than 4 years, he can still be eligible to take up the examination and go ahead with the certification. So training is given as per the written practice. And if these standards, allow non-native speakers, like if they don't have English as their mother tongue, they can take additional time. And these are the benefits given to non-native speakers. And it also talks about the training hours and experience required. So these are the requirements to qualify a personnel into an NDT field. And for the examination, we have 4 different examinations. The first one being the vision examination. So vision examination is very important because I have personally, faced certain people who are colorblind, and they will not reveal it to us. So what happens is NDT, for most of the NDT techniques, your eye is your sensor. You will have to have an eye for defects, eye for detail, where you will be able to spot the color and say this is the defect. So if a person is colorblind and we don't have a proper vision examination, he might have very good knowledge. He will clear all the other 3 exams. And when you have to actually put him into a scene where he has to find a defect, he will not be able to do the defect. This is like, operation is success, but the patient is dead. So the idea here is, the vision examination stands first in any NDT activity. And then we have general and specific examinations, where general is talking about, the entire NDT principles and such things. And in specific, it talks about the particular job that I'm dealing with. Suppose I'm dealing with a casting or a weld, then I ask questions very specific to welds. Or if there is a casting, I ask questions specific to casting process. And then we have a practical examination. And one common thing that, all these documents that I was talking to you about, SNT, CP 189, and ISO 9712, they all demand a pass mark of 80%. All through our academics, anywhere between 35 to 50% is the pass mark. But NDT organizations require you to score at least 80%, because anybody wants to guess why we need an 80% pass mark? Okay, so the requirement of an 80% pass mark is because if there is a requirement for NDT, then the point is there is a life dependency on that particular component. Suppose, let's say I'm making a bolt and it's going for a space rocket. Yeah. So if the bolt has to fail, the rocket has to fail. So when there is a life dependency, or if the component is very critical, then you have to have thorough knowledge of what you're learning. A 50% pass mark will not help. So we devise questions in such a fashion that a person is just about to get 80%, and the remaining 20% is what we ask very skilled questions. So a person who can just score about 80, we can be sure that he is thorough of his basics and principles, and he is capable of saving lives. So this is the requirement, or this is why, all these standards require at least 80% as the pass mark. So I would like to take a pause here, because I finished the manpower thing. Am I going too fast, or you want me to, modify the style of presentation, or shall I go ahead? Okay, fine. So the next M that we are going to talk about is the machine, or the equipment. So when we talk about the equipment or the machine, there are lots of, oops, sorry. there are lots of applications where, you know, we get to decide where the mission stands. So if I have to choose an equipment, for example, let's say for a place where I have access only from one side, let's say it's a fuel tank, for example. So the fuel tank is going to have one inlet where I can pour in the fuel, but the inner part of the tank is not at all accessible. So if I want to reach or inspect such a tank, then I have to think of, of an equipment that is capable of scanning the entire thing only from the outside, which will help me to detect if there is a problem with the product, or if the component is too high in temperature, then I'll not be even able to touch the component. Then I have to think of a non-invasive way where I can reach the component and pick or choose a method which will help me find the defect inside it. And so forth. We have the area of interest. Suppose if it's in the nook of a place, or if it's in the center, or if it's in some elevation. So these are the places where I have to come to a point where I decide which equipment I want to choose. Then I have my sensitivity requirements. Sensitivity requirements is nothing but how small a defect we can detect. So I'll be discussing that, and the precision, accuracy, and resolution, the cost, which is another money factor, and the requirements of the customer. So all these factors, you know, are not limited, but there are multiple other factors which help or which decide which equipment I'm going to get for my NDT application. So having said that, so if I have to pick an application based on the defect that I want to find, then again, I have lots of defects where, you know, if it's just on the surface, I'll have to pick an NDT technique. If it's a little subsurface and not open to the surface, I have to choose another method. And if it's a crack, for example, it's a two-dimensional defect. It's just going to be a line. So I'll have to use a technique which will be, you know, helpful to find a line. And there are volumetric defects which are like, for example, a gas porosity or a hole, or probably a slag inclusion or a foreign inclusion. So if there is an inclusion, it's going to have some dimensions. It's going to have a three-dimensional image. So I have to choose my technique based on the defect and then pick the correct equipment for that defect. And we also have another criteria called the contact criteria. This I was telling in the previous slide, when the temperature is too high, I will not be in a position to go and touch the component. So I'll have to use a non-contact method. And if you talk about, you know, your hospital where we go and take CT scan, for example, or a X-ray, for example, you know, if you have a defect in, if you have a injury in your hand, if you have if the bone is you know, let's say fractured, for example,
Joel, your voice has gone.
I think I got disconnected. Hello.
Yes, Joel, you can start now. Yes,
Yeah,
now you can
so
start.
yeah, okay. So I just want to know which slide I was you know, when I got disconnected.
Yeah, you were here.
Okay, so I was talking about, you know, non-invasive techniques where we need to be very cautious on what we need to find and how we want to find that defect. So I just wanted to show you the slide where, you know, we can see the type of NDT technique on the top and the defects on the left-hand side. So, and which technique would help us to find it. So VT stands for visual testing, PT stands for penetrant testing, MT stands for magnetic particle testing, ET stands for electromagnetic radiographic testing, ultrasonic testing angle, ultrasonic testing shear, acoustic emission, and ultrasonic thickness gauging. So it's just you know, just overview. The black dot here says it is 100%, or the probability of detection is very high. The one with the star says it requires special techniques. And one with the circle says any standard method with the proper technique, and only then you will be able to find that defect. So it is very interesting to note, for example, if I have a crack in my component, yeah, uh, radiography testing is what most people get into their mind, that if I take an X-ray, I'll be able to see the crack. But on the contrary, this is not the right method to detect a crack. X-ray will not reveal any cracks, and it requires very special technique if you want to find a crack in radiography testing. So this picture, as such, it just gives you an overview of which is the easiest detection with using which method. Suppose you have a, let's say, a inclusion in the component, then yes, it's a volumetric defect, and radiography will definitely help you find that. And if you have a porosity, again a volumetric defect, yes. If you have an undercut, which is a mismatch between the weld and the parent material, these are the places where radiography will help. So it's not that radiography or any technique for that matter will help us detect all the defects. So to make sure that a particular equipment that that I have procured works properly, I also have to get some auxiliary equipment, just like a charger for a mobile phone. For every NDT equipment, we need an auxiliary equipment which will validate the equipment's functionality. So we have different kinds of equipment, such as the calibration blocks, the verification blocks, and CRMs, and reference images. So these auxiliary validity equipment help us to find or validate whether the machine is working good or not. So to give you a typical example, I just wanted to show this slide to tell you what happens when your machine is not working properly. So for example, I have an equipment, a weighing equipment, for example, and it gives me, let's say my mass is 10 kg, and every time I weigh it, it gives me 5 kg minus or 5 kg plus. So it will either say 5 or 15. Then the point is, it's always 5 kgs error, but it's accurate. So the point is, it is either on the plus or on the minus, but the 5 kg is not going to change. So that is when, that is not going to help me. But if I validate with my auxiliary equipment or my verification block, I'll get to know that how much my equipment is getting deviated. And yeah. Do you want to take a question? I think I had a raised hand. Okay. So when we talk about precision, here the case is I'm always getting a 5 kg error on the positive side. And if the mass is, let's say, 10 kg, my machine is going to show me 15.8, 15.2. This means the values are repeatable. The repeatability is very good. The repeatability is very good, but the accuracy is poor. But when I say an equipment is accurate and precise, that means it's always showing me 10 and it's showing me 10.2 or 9.8, and it is within the range of the precision that I require, and the values are repeatable. So the same goes with any NDT equipment, where you also have to be precise with your results. The repeatability should be there, and you should also have your accurate results. So another factor that that goes along with the equipment is the resolution. So we know with any digital equipment, resolution refers to the smallest change in value. So what we deal with the NDT equipment is, suppose I have, let's say, two defects close to each other, very close to each other. If my resolution of the NDT equipment is poor, it's going to show me the two defects as one defect. If the resolution is good, it will show me both the defects as two separate defects. So here, the resolution is otherwise called as sensitivity. So in radiography terms, we don't call anything as resolution. We call it as sensitivity. So the sensitivity is nothing but how small a defect I can detect with my radiography or any NDT technique for that matter. So for example, the sensitivity that we usually deal with the nuclear applications is 1%. And with the boilers and other critical applications, we deal with 2%. So let me explain what this 1% and 2% is. Suppose I have a 100 mm block, yeah, and I need to find a defect inside it. If I say my sensitivity is 1%, 1% of 100 mm is 1 mm. So I'm trying to say to my customer, if I give a sensitivity of 1%, it means any defect greater than 1 mm is detectable using the technique that I'm using. So for example, if I say there is a 0.5 mm defect inside the component. So I'm trying to warn my client that I will not be able to find that defect because it is less than 1%. So most of the NDT standards require us to give a sensitivity anywhere between 2 to 5%. So special applications requires to achieve a sensitivity of 1%. So the concept is how small the defect that can be allowed. So there is nothing called as zero defect component in this world. So if I'm able to find acceptable sensitivity as per the requirement, yeah, then we are good to go with the customer. Then another factor, when choosing an equipment is, the restrictions of each method. So I am sure that, all of you know the basic NDT techniques that we use on our day-to-day lives. So when I talk about liquid penetrant testing, PT, this is very important thing that I usually convey with my participants. Like if you do a PT test, you will be able to detect four surface defects. Even if there is a small micron level hole and it has a reservoir inside, still PT will be able to find that defect. But if the surface is closed, if the entrance is closed, and you don't have an entry point in from the surface to that defect, then PT will not be able to detect that defect. So, one typical case that we do in a real life scenario is, we inspect PT on a glass. So what happens is, glass is a transparent material. And once we apply PT, the penetrant just tries to get absorbed into the small orifice in the surface and it travels inside the glass. So it's a wonderful sight to look into where, you will see the orifice through which the penetrant gets inside and it, slowly gets broad into the defect and opens out the defect. So again, if the surface is closed, you will not be able to detect it with your PT. And when I say magnetic, obviously magnetic particle testing, it refers only to magnetic materials. And if the material is not magnetic, for example, aluminum or copper, then this testing completely goes to null. It cannot be used at all. So, and the other restriction is it can go only immediate subsurface. It cannot go deep subsurface. And for radiography testing, we have limitations on the maximum thickness. Very complicated radiographic equipment as on date, like Linac and other equipments can go up to 300 mm. But anything more than 300 mm, radiography testing will not help you at all. You will not be able to find any defect on a material that is more than 300 mm in thickness. And for UT, the operator dependence is where, it's a very important aspect with UT. The equipment as such holds only 25% of detectability and the remaining 75% goes with the skill set of the person. And we have electromagnetic testing, which again requires a conductive surface and the depth of detection is very, very low. And if I'm talking about infrared thermography, again, if it's insulated, I will not be able to use that technique. And if I'm using an acoustic sensor emission device, then it requires 24 hours monitoring. I need to make sure that the sensor is always in contact. If, I put a duct tape and it has, loosened itself from the surface, then it will look everything is normal, but actually there would be a crack that is being missed out. So all these are, practical difficulties where we usually face with the choice of equipment, and each technique has its own limitations. So quickly, I would like to go to the next M, which is nothing but the material. So the thing that we deal with materials as such is very, very vast, and I just want to quickly run through the factors that influence entity based on the metals. So as such, the common categories of metals are metals as such, ceramics, which is again non-metal, and semiconductors, polymers, and composites. So metals is what we do use in our metal industry in our day-to-day fabrication. Ceramics is a lot more brittle. It is more prone to crack. It cannot take load, but it has excellent scratch resistance, chemical resistance, corrosion resistance, and it can be used for making polished surfaces, which will not be possible with the metal surface. And we have semiconductors, which is modified metals, or probably the lanthanide actinide series, where the silicon or whatever it is, the non-metals basically are tweaked with some other element, so that it becomes partially conducting material, which is used in your computers and other electronic devices. Then we also have our polymers and composites. So why am I talking about all these material categories? Is because NDT can be used in all these materials. You can use NDT for all the category of metals. And again, I want to talk about the crystal structure, the fabrication treatment, and the finishing of the metals, which will again affect NDT. For example, let's say I'm doing a thermal treatment. I'm trying to change the crystalline structure of the material, which I'll be showing in a short while, which means that I'm trying to achieve something, make the metal more durable by doing a treatment. Yeah. Hello. Yes. Sir. Having said about the categories of metals, we also need to know about the manufacturing processes, which will again affect the NDT process. Like suppose I have a solid form, that is, I have a metal that is liquid, and if the form of the liquid is getting changed into a solid form by use of heat, then we call this process as casting. And casting has its own manufacturing inherent defects, or the primary defects, which will just get captured inside the casting, and we have to use a technique which will help us to find the casting defects. The same goes with the machining. When I have to reshape, or I'm sorry, if I have to reshape a material in a plastic form without going to the level of melting it to a liquid, if I just keep it in a semi-solid or in its plastic form and try to do a machining or hot forging, or try to give it on a press and try to change its shape, then again these processes is going to induce a particular type of defect, which I have to deal with, and I'll be also showing you all those discontinuities. And if I have to use a machining tool, then I'm going to induce a surface crack on the defect by use of, if my run of machine is too high, if my tooling depth is too high, then I'm going to induce a heat induced stress inside the metal, which is going to develop a crack. And I also have this welding process where it's similar to casting, but it's a localized form of melting a particular place and then joining them together as a weld. So when I have to talk about shape changes, there are four types of changes, where one is a volume change, and the other one is I don't change the volume, but I just add or subtract or change the shape by some method. So here I just wanted to show the slide, where there are two categories of changing the shape. One by not changing the shape at all. I have this. Let's say I have yeah. Yes, let's say I have wax in my hand. I want to make a candle out of it. Yeah. So I have the entire volume that is getting converted into a different shape. So there is no loss in volume. The process is casting basically. So I have a volume of molten metal, which I'm just going to convert into another shape by use of a liquid flow, or by deforming the solid using a, like I have a powder pressing process where I use a powder manufacturing machine where it compresses the powder and then creates it into a plastic component or something. So here the volume is the loss of volume is very, very little or very negligible, because I'll be reusing the entire volume into changing its shape. And when there is a change in volume, like for example, I want to proof machine or, you know, treat it chemically by putting a plating on top of it, or remove a coating by use of a corrosive element or something, then all these change or affect the volume. So when I change the volume of a metal, then I'm trying to change it by use of a chemical method or applying heat, or by joining it mechanically by using welding. So all laser special methods and other things. So when I'm trying to join two metals, I'm trying to bring in two metals that are completely, homogeneous separately. And when I'm trying to join them together, then I'm trying to change the volume of the material, which has its own kind of defects that are induced during that production process. So basically, whenever there is a change in volume, the point of getting a defect is more prone than compared with the casting defect. But again, casting is like, it's an inherent defect. We call it as a dormant defect, for example. Like usual defects with casting is, let's say, a porosity. A porosity is a gas, so it's going to have smooth edges. But whereas if I'm dealing with a volumetric change, volume change, then there is going to be cracks, which means that the crack is going to be more susceptible to failure than a porosity. So I will explain that in my, the forthcoming slides. So this energies that we use, for example, let's say I'm using heat to change a material. Then what happens when I apply heat is I'm altering the grains of the material and changing it to different phases of the metal. So what really happens is, suppose, for example, I want to heat treat a material. Then I'm trying to, above the Curie temperature, I'm trying to change the grains of the metal so that it either becomes more uniform and the crystals are aligned properly. And this will, try to relieve all the stress inside the metal. So what basically happens is when I use an energy form to change the shape, the metallurgical properties changes. And this particular case, not just this particular case, any case for that matter, all these processes invoke a defect in one way or the other. So a typical case where, heat treatment is done, we see a lot of surface cracks coming out from the component once it's heat treated. So the overall benefit is achieved that the metal, or it's taken above the Curie temperature, the surface is hardened and everything. But ultimately, when it comes to NDT, we end up finding lots of surface level cracks. So this is the reason why I'm trying to show what processes cause what kind of defects in your NDT. So now the other requirements to change the shape is like when I have to put some painting on the material, or if I have to change the abrasive property, or I have to assemble it. If the component is too big and I cannot ship it in one piece, then I'll have to split it into two parts, load it on a commercial vehicle, and then once it goes, I should be in a position to assemble it together. So all these steps require NDT at some point or the other, because anything that I do to change the shape of my component is going to affect my the material grain structure and induce one defect or the other inside my material. So I was telling this lattice structure in the previous slide. I just want to quickly run through the concepts which all of you are very aware about. So if I talk about body-centered cubic structure, for example, iron as such is called polymorphous because it can exhibit its character in BCC and FCC. So if I put it above a certain temperature, it's going to change its crystal structure to a FCC structure. So what happens in a BCC structure in a room temperature is it has a packing factor of 68%, which means the remaining 32% inside the atom is free. So the density automatically reduces. And when I'm trying to break this component, it's kind of going to break easily than an FCC structure. So the packing factor determines the strength of the material. And basically this strength, this strength determines the tensile properties or the physical properties of the metal. And in fact, and ultimately this, this choice of metal helps us in picking the right NDT method. Because if I say I'm dealing with the, let's say, BCC structure, for example, my material is as such, let's say it's a low carbon steel material or a low alloy steel material. I will be looking for defects that come from its alloys. Like for example, there'll be a small content of carbon, probably manganese, and all these processes are going to have oxygen trapped some point or the other. So when there is an oxygen trap, then it's more prone to rust. So that's why our low alloy metals, the surface gets oxidized very quickly. So I'll have to look for an NDT method that that will help me prevent or give a coating that prevents me from doing NDT properly. So then I have to remove the coating to perform an NDT and again have the coating back on it. So these are the parameters that they affect the NDT directly. And again, packing factor of HCP and FCC is the highest density possible with the material. So FCC and HCP are going to give me very good tensile properties. And obviously these are high strength materials, which means when the toughness is going to increase, the material is going to break like a biscuit. So the ductility property of the steel is what we look after. It's like rubber. Steel is like rubber in the metal industry. It can take a lot of shocks and still be in the elastic region and come back to its original shape. So when I'm trying to increase my hardness, or when I'm trying to increase the structure or choose a different material, then definitely my strength is going to get lost, and I will be looking for more cracks on the surface because it's getting more tough and it's getting more brittle. So this particular, it's a stress strain graph which shows how a low carbon steel, though its stress taking capacity is very low, it has a lot of ductile properties, which means it can elongate comfortably for a particular period of time and still get back to its own spot. Whereas if I'm talking about a medium carbon steel, it's going to break somewhere halfway through a low carbon steel. And if I'm going to take a high carbon steel, it's more prone to getting cracked. I have seen in physical cases where anything above 25 mm of thickness in carbon steel definitely breaks. It doesn't work out in NDT. So again, coming to the plain carbon and the low alloy steel, whenever there is more than 7% of alloys added to a steel, then we have austenitic or stainless steel, for example. We face a lot of issues with the NDT because there are lots of grain structures which prevent ultrasonic waves, for example, to pass through such austenitic steel. So we get to use special techniques where, since because it is alloyed, we are forced to use different NDT techniques to make sure that we are able to test such alloy steels. Okay. So quickly talking about the elements which influences the alloys. For example, let's say carbon. The more carbon that I add, the more brittle it's going to become. And if I talk about, let's say silicon, for example, silicon is like, it's a good deoxidizer. It will absorb all the oxygen. Like if you take any electronic equipment, they'll put few silicon bags inside the metal. So if I'm going to keep silicon inside my metal, it's going to absorb all the oxygen. which otherwise, if it gets in contact with the hydrogen, it's going to give me a hydrogen induced cracking. So I want my oxygen removed from my component. So this is why, we alloy silicon to make sure that it is deoxidized. And so is the case with manganese. And moly helps us to increase the strength or the tensile properties of material. Chromium helps us in corrosion, and nickel also helps in increasing the toughness of the material. So to just tell you, like, why am I talking about the material selection, is because as such, any metal, the abundance of metal is more common with steel, and most of our NDT techniques are devised for all the procedures as such, and all the technical information that we have, most of them deal with steel. Since because it's abundant and it's used everywhere, we need to have such extensive documents which help us, to make sure that all the NDT processes are validated. Hardness, for example, let's say a designer wants to have a bill of material ready for a particular drawing, he has to mention what type of testing he has to do for that material. So he gives a tensile property requirement, he gives a NDT requirement, and he also gives certain dimensional requirements. So if a material sheet is given to us, and if we see that an NDT is required in the drawing, which means, as I told you previously, there is life involved, there is a life risk involved in that drawing or the specification, and that is why NDT is involved. So as such, we have to ensure that whatever the designer has required of, or the acceptance criteria that he has given, is met with the material. So here I just want to tell you the difference between a discontinuity and a defect. The selection of material tells us what type of test that I have to do, and here discontinuity versus defect. Discontinuity is nothing but when there is a homogeneous structure and there is some discontinuity, then we call it as a discontinuity, which can be or cannot be a defect. But when I say it's a defect, then it is not meeting my requirements. For example, I am trying to make let's say a lid or something. So this lid goes inside it's a very critical lid. For example, let's say it goes to the head of a tanker. Yeah, here I would say, let me accept a defect of up to 10 mm. But if the same thing goes to a less critical application, let's say this lid goes to a drainage pipe, I can say, okay, instead of 10 mm for this application, I can give her an allowance of 20 mm that can be allowed, or the size of defect can be up to 20 mm. In that case, I will be in a position to accept this lid, not for the tanker, but for the the drainage cap. So the discontinuity is an identification of a lack of homogeneity, whereas a defect is not acceptable as per the requirements of the customer. So to just give you a brief overview of what happens when the material is not homogeneous, I just wanted to put this drawing here, which says whenever something is homogeneous, you will have the complete metal and there is nothing in between. But let's assume that I have a hole here. This means that the surface area that can take the impact is reduced, which means this particular hole is not going to give me any strength because it is empty. So if, let's say I'm trying to give a stress to this component, just because there is a less surface area for the load to act upon, then this material is going to fail. So this is where the standards play an important role, trying to tell what size can be accepted for this application. And another typical problem is the cracks here. We all know that the load by area, when I am talking about stress, it means, the load by area, which is Newton per millimeter square or whatever it is, an area. So when I'm decreasing my surface area, then my stress is going to increase. And in the typical case of a crack, the tip of a crack has the smallest area. So when the tip is almost nearing zero, my stress is going to go infinite. So if there is a crack in the metal And if I'm going to give a stress, the tip of the crack is going to propagate because it is going to have stress at infinity. So this is why cracks are considered a very, very severe defect compared to a round or a spherical shaped or uniform shaped defect, because this kind of a defect will stay dormant for most of the time and it has smooth edges which will not propagate. Whereas here, since it has sharp edges, one small impact, the crack will grow. Another impact, the crack will grow again. So this is why cracks are considered very important when we talk about defects in a metal. So here again, when we talk about welding discontinuities, most of you would have known, the common defects are cracks, heat affected cracks. Then we have concavity or convexity, which is nothing but the weld getting concaved inside the metal, or convex is like it's getting bulged on top of the metal. Then we'll have incomplete penetration, fusion. Then we also have excess penetration and undercuts. So I'm just giving you a brief overview of how a material can impact the decision of NDT. So here, the other common defects when it comes to a forging material is bursts, laps, and pits due to debris in the rolling process or whatever. And then we have a split because of environmental factors, or repeated cyclic load which causes a split in the metal. And we also have localized attacks, like for example, let's say there is a small hole. Hydrogen has its atomic number is 1, so it's the smallest element in the world, and hydrogen can easily penetrate inside a small crack. And once it penetrates, it will definitely mix with the the oxygen inside the metal, or it will form hydrogen sulfide, and which will cause immediate corrosion on the metal. So here, any defect that is on the surface and when it's localized, this is more very severe, and it causes permanent damage which cannot be repaired on the metal. Yeah. Then finally, fatigue and creep. These are the two topics that I wanted to show. Fatigue, as all of us know, it is tiredness, low. So if like sitting here on a Saturday evening, I have to run through the entire evening, and once I finish the presentation, if someone says, okay, let's listen to another presentation, then you're tired. So that's where you will break down. So something like that. So fatigue is what causes instant it's not an instant, it's a over period of time, the load gets accumulated, and at one point it is going to break. So this kind of a defect can easily be seen when we do a tensile testing, where if a material is really stressed out, it is going to try its level best to stick on, but at one point it will break and it will have some edgy defects. But whereas if a material is very temperament, it's, let's say it's going to break like a biscuit, then the fracture specimen will have very smooth edges and it will almost look like it's broken, like a biscuit, as an example. So this is where fatigue plays in. And similarly, when I talk about creep is cyclic load, which is like I'm slowly giving it a permanent load, which is developing in its primary, secondary, and the tertiary stage until it finally fractures. So quickly finishing the material, we need to know about the NDT method. So NDT method as such deals with the requirement, or what sort of material that what sort of method should I tell my man, what equipment should he use on what material. So this is where the method plays in. So what I will be telling is, as an employer, I should be in a position to give my NDT technician a set of clear-cut instructions as to what equipment he should use, how he should validate his machine, and what material should he use the machine. So if the equipment is working properly, the man is excellent. And if he's doing a magnetic particle testing on an aluminum component and coming back and saying it is looking good, then the entire, the whole principle is lost. Aluminum is non-magnetic material. So there is no point in doing a magnetic particle testing on a on a non-magnetic material. So the need of giving them a clear-cut instruction is another important factor for for the NDT process. We have to be very clear with our SOP and tell them this is what we have to do. And to control this, we have several standards from the national standards and international standards, which I don't have to tell you about. You're all experts in the standards, where each standard has its own requirements. So one point that I want to stress here is there are very funny standards. For example, I have seen a standard for an aluminum specification which says you can have porosities. The number of porosities that can be accepted is 3000 into the thickness of the metal, which means, let's say I have a 10 mm defect, I can allow 30,000 porosity in that component, which means the standard is trying to say, don't consider porosity of a defect. If the component is full of pores, you please accept it. And these are standards which try to make sure that you're not rejecting on the wrong basis, because the application is very, very lenient. So, all these standards are, some are even national standards, for the particular country, which clearly defines what or where you need to accept a particular method. And then we finally have this, method confusion with the testing, inspection, examination, and evaluation. So a lot of, my training, I have this question asked. They asked me, what is the difference between testing, inspection, and examination? So I just wanted to put this slide here because, when I say non-destructive testing, it means on the field testing and taking in the results, or taking in on the spot answer, or on the spot resolution for the testing. So it is just one data. But when I say it's an inspection, it means that I'm taking the data and collecting it and, giving a lot of trials to it and then coming towards the final conclusion. That's my inspection. So testing is just one data. Inspection is a collection of data. And examination is like wisdom from the inspection data. So I make sure I take the inputs from each NDT testing. I make sure I analyze the pattern, and then I come to an evaluation or an examination point where I scientifically come to a conclusion that this is the defect that is available on the equipment. And then we have an evaluation, which is even more scientific approach, where we bring in all the statistical data over a period of time. We bring in the probability of detection. We bring in a lot of factors, to make sure that it's a very scientific approach to the NDE examination. And to give you a difference about the technique and the method, it's like if I say I'm doing a particular technique, for example, radiography testing, and I'm doing a particular technique called single wall technique, then it is that there are many techniques inside a method, but I'm interested about a single technique. So there are 16 recognized methods in NDT, but each method has several techniques inside it. It's like saying, if you want to have a lamp, you can either fit it on the wall, or you can hang it over the head, or you can have it under the ground and project it on top like a spotlight. So it's like saying, I have a method, but there are different techniques. So I will just, quickly run through the different types of NDT methods. Acoustic emissions, AE stands for acoustic emission. Acoustic emission is like we listen to the sound emitted during metal when it goes, or when it is subjected to a crack. It's like you fix a sensor to a metal and it keeps listening to that sound all 24 hours or 365 days a year. And when there is a crack, there is going to have it's going to create a small noise. And this noise is captured in the acoustic emission technique, which is a permanent setup, and it will monitor continuously. Then when we talk about electromagnetic testing, we talk about Hall effect, where we try to induce like eddy current on the surface and see if there is any surface irregularities. And GPR is ground penetrating radar, where you know we run through the mines. If you've seen, we will have landmines and other things where it is under the ground, but you have to look from top of the ground. So that's GPR. Then we have guided wave UT, which means the wave is sent for a very long distance. Then we also have LTM, which is laser testing methods, where we point a laser on a particular component to see if the laser beam takes the shape of the metal to see for volumetric or surface level defects. Then we have leak testing, where we check for minute leak of gas or air. Penetrant testing, then magnetic flux leakage, magnetic particle testing, microwave testing, neutron radiography, radiography testing, infrared thermography, ultrasonic testing, vibrational analysis, and visual testing. So I think these are the different methods, and probably if you want, we can have another discussion on the different techniques and the basics of each of them. So ultimately, having said all this, the ultimate goal of any NDT or any fabricator or anybody for that matter is, at the end of the day, it's going to be a business. It's like, what profit am I going to take out of it? And what am I going to gain by following an NDT? So what we tend to achieve is we try to make sure that we have a uniform quality level over the industry, so that anybody who does NDT will have a uniform level and make sure that it is acceptable to a particular standard. So that is one primary requirement of an NDT method. Then we have to make sure that all these failures and other things are avoided. And if I say I have to have a particular method, particular mission, particular material with a particular accuracy, then I'm trying to make sure that the test is integral and reliable, which means anybody, any person with that same test parameter should be able to have a repeatable identification of a particular NDT technique. Then we also have, make sure that the product is operationally ready. Suppose an NDT certificate is tagged on to a component, you can right away use it because it is NDT examined. So we are making the readiness of the component that is made sure. Then we are trying to avoid the testing costs on a future basis. For example, for test plates, let's say we need a raw material, we make sure NDT is done on the raw material before fabrication is started, so that the manufacturer does not lose his component at a later point of time, where he missions and finds out that there's a huge defect which he could have avoided when he had done it in the raw material. So all these are the method, the primary reasons why we have NDT methods. And again, when I talk about the limitations of such methods, it does not ensure that all the defects are found. It is just a guidance or a recommendation, or probably a way forward how to take about to make sure maximum probability is achieved. But again, it still depends on the operator and his level of honesty, which means I may or may not detect a defect even though I have all these systems in place. So these are the limitations of NDT. And quickly finishing off, money is another factor where NDT is decided upon. For example, as I was telling you, we had done a CMRL project. The designer has a requirement of building the pillars for the columns. So what he does is, if the design says the pillar's diameter can be 12 feet, 12 inches or 1 feet. But what the designer does is he makes sure that he changes the design and changes the requirements to 1 meter. Instead of 1 feet, he changes it to 1 meter, because once he changes it into 1 meter, he takes care a lot of irregularities with the concrete mixing. He doesn't have to worry about what rod is being used, if the rod is being properly tagged, and if the thickness diameter of the rod is proper. So instead of saying 1 feet, if he says 1 meter, all these unaccounted things is taken care of, and he can easily waive off NDT. So These are very important factors which people decide, or when they want to choose or maybe skip an NDT process. So again, the other factors that that require for us to design, the factors that cost money is when the inspection facility is not available in a particular place, then which means I have to shift the component to another place and transport it back. So all these are critical factors where I have to decide whether to invoke an NDT system in my own place, or probably outsource it. So the quantity, the amount of inspection that is needed, the quality of inspection that is needed, all these factors are monetary factors that help us to design what kind of NDT process that we want to choose. Again, as I was telling, the cost and quality is definitely a factor where I have to also consider my cost of the product before I want to sell it. I cannot do NDT, like for example, we have small components, they sell it for 1 rupee or 2 rupee, but NDT costs will be like 600, 700 rupees. So, it doesn't make sense to do NDT on such components. So, and if it is critical, they spend 700 for it. So that's the cost versus quality and compromise. And I think, ultimately the money factor here is what and where is my component going to go and how I'm going to use it. And this is where, all these M's come into. So thank you so much for listening so patiently. If you have any questions, we can go ahead with the question sessions.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Joel.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for your great knowledge here and good sharing. Of course, NDT is not a small topic, so there will be some more time we will have to put in for understanding NDT in some more details. So we would again contact you for one more session if you could oblige us again. So that will be sometime later. We will take up your convenience in picture in service. Also, I would like to thank Siva Kumar. Is my colleague from MRB. So who told me your name, and that's how I contacted you, and we could do this for the whole of audience. So thank you very much for all the participants joining today. I think there were around 135. Now some people may have just left, it looks. Yeah. So there were around 136 which we clocked. Yeah. Yeah. One question from our Bondeji. Yeah. Our India chapter chair. Yeah.
I think you have to unmute yourself, sir.
Yeah, but oh yes, please.
I had a very good remark from our past president, Professor Ravi, and that is for today's speaker. He is saying, excellent and engaging speaker, lucid presentation, good depth and very practical in presentation, very useful talk for choice of inspection methods, detection, quantification, and costing. Thank you for serving and with real benefit to the material business community. This is a leadership. So congratulations, Joel. And
thank you.
We are expecting you to join us as a member, and I am eagerly waiting for your membership. So that will add value to our chapter. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. There is one question by Santoshji. What is ultrasonic immersion testing? If you can provide some information.
Okay. So I was talking about contact and non-contact, invasive and non-invasive techniques. So ultrasonic testing is like we are dealing with ultrasonic sound levels. That means, we are dealing with sound frequencies at a much higher than what we can audible or whatever is audible. So our audible range is something below 20 kilohertz. But when the frequency of the sound is increased, we are dealing with megahertz of volume. Then, immersion technique comes into play where I have to automate my testing but still make sure that my probes are not depleted. It's a non-contact, non-invasive technique where I immerse my component inside a liquid, yeah, and make sure that the probe is not touching the component, and the sound is made to travel through the liquid medium and then inside the solid medium. So the point here, what we are able to achieve because of immersion testing is we can move the component on a let's say a conveyor line, and still immerse the component. What we usually do is we have a fish tank kind of setup where the component is drawn inside the tank and it is sealed on both sides. It is filled with water, and the probe just stands on top of the water and it scans the component inside the water without touching the component. So this way the component can keep moving and we will still be able to achieve the ultrasonic testing, which is saves a lot on the probe, because the probe events it in a manual method where we touch and physically scrub through the metal. That is exactly stopped here. So it's an automatic method which helps us to quickly test a lot of components when the volume is more. So that is where immersion testing comes into play.
Just GRAPES.
Hello, may I request Vikesh Shah to come in?
BK Shah. Thank you, Sudhakar ji.
Anji.
Because whoever did the replacement in flooring damaged it, so it doesn't.
Joel, this was Mr. BK Shah. We were talking about to you earlier.
So, no, just one clarification. Yes. You see, you mentioned the difference in terminology, that is a discontinuity and defect.
Yes.
Now, there is one more term called flaw. Okay. Suppose in a pump shaft, we have keyway. It's a discontinuity, but it is present in the component to provide some function. Okay.
Correct.
It is desirable discontinuity. Okay.
Correct.
Undesirable discontinuity will be a flaw.
Yes.
Say pore in a weld. If it is not there, we are happy.
Yes.
So it is discontinuity, but it is undesirable. It's a flaw.
Correct.
But it is acceptable up to some size. But
Correct.
crack in a weld is a discontinuity. It's undesirable. It's a flaw, and it makes the weld unacceptable, rejectable. It's a defect.
Correct.
Just to complete that terminology, okay, I thought I will just define the term flaw.
Yeah, I can quickly go through that slide once again if you want.
Now,
It
there
says-
you mentioned two terms, discontinuity and flaw, defect. Flaw is missing there. That's why I thought I will just add that.
Okay, so see, actually, what we deal with the NDT is like we call it as a flaw based on the standards. Like, for example, if I have to call something as a flaw, which means it is not acceptable. But whereas
No. Flaw is acceptable up to some degree. If it is not acceptable, it's a defect. Unacceptable flaw is a defect.
Yeah. You're
Okay,
saying
just-
yes, I agree to it. Yes, I totally agree. Yes.
No
Yeah.
code is asking for flaw-free material. Okay. Code gives the acceptance limit.
Correct.
What could have been the basis for code limit of acceptance of flaw?
Correct.
Is it
Actually,
based
thank you,
on
Mr.
any
Vikesh.
calculation?
We had this terminology as discontinuity in very recent formats because there are different 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional discontinuities. So just saying it as a flaw was not very appropriate for certain metals. Like for example, let's say I'm dealing with the aluminum sample, for example, and if I have a flaw, then aluminum certain cases have shrinkages, and in certain cases it does not have shrinkages. The code says, there are different types of shrinkages, and certain shrinkages are not allowed in certain aluminum components. So when I say a flaw, it was not appropriate in the case of NDT, because a flaw is something that has some volume to it. And here, when I said discontinuity, people were readily able to accept it because it had a mathematical parameter to it, that it can either be a two-dimensional or three-dimensional defect. So not sorry defect, discontinuity. So that is why we had to use the terminology discontinuity instead of a flaw, the type of defect.
No, no, I gave you example of keyway in a pump shaft. It's a discontinuity, but it is present in the component to provide some function. It's not a flaw. It's not a defect.
Yeah, see, discontinuity as such, we are not talking about induced discontinuities, artificial discontinuities. We are dealing.
Discontinuity can be present in the component to provide some function, or it may be undesirable. Undesirable discontinuities are called flaws, and flaw which make the component rejectable is a defect. It's a
Yes.
terminology.
No, actually, when we deal with the discontinuity in entity, that's what I wanted to say. When we deal with discontinuity in entity point of view, we are not talking about the artificial or the the man-made discontinuities on the metal. We are not talking about the shape of the component. We are dealing with the component as such. We are not destroying it. We are having an apple as an apple and then trying to find out what is inside the apple. If the apple has a keyway made into it artificially, I'm not worried about that discontinuity. For me, that itself is the component. With the keyhole inside is the component. And anything that comes from the investigation of that keyway, that is my discontinuity. That's the difference between, the production from the entity point. That's
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So there is another question from Mr. Suresh. What is maximum subsurface defect depth magnetic particle inspection can detect?
Okay, so magnetic particle as such, we are talking about permanent magnets and electromagnets. Suppose I'm using an electromagnet, for example, it has its own, the type of current, and it has its own magnetic field and magnetic strength. So when I'm giving an alternating current, which means I'll be giving a plus and a minus alternatively. So this kind of AC magnetic particle testing will give a depth of about 2 to 3 mm. So we call this as a skin effect, it just rubs on the skin. But when we have a DC, half wave DC, or a full wave DC, a direct current, which means the positive and the negative are not going to change. It's going to be the constant for the two poles of the magnets. So when I give a DC current, since the travel of the magnetic waves is going to be on a constant direction, I can go up to a depth of 5 mm at the max, or probably even 6 mm. So that's the thing. So the technique maximum, the answer to your question is up to 6 mm.
Okay. So there is one question by Mr. SMG. I don't know who SMG is. Yeah. So he has a crack detection system installed on Galdabini Max straightening machines.
Okay.
See, there are two straightening machines in our gear in any gear shop. There are 2-3 different make straightening machines for shaft kind of components, and you need to have that shaft to be straightened within 30 micron or 25 micron now as per the requirements. Yeah, so that is one. So there are 2-3 machines. One is Galdabini Make, which is Italy. There is a Towa Make, which is Japan. Okay, so these machines detects crack. What happens is in the while rotating, they find that there is some inherent crack, and they throw that component out. Okay, this happens sometimes. But what happens is, if you really want to check that crack, people are not able to find out, even with UT or X-ray or MPI or radiography, that there is a crack inside. So can you suggest any NDT method to find out the type and location of this crack? If
Yeah.
at all it
So,
has, yeah.
instead of me suggesting, I just want to quickly show that slide where, ASME section 5 gives you a right way. So according to me, I'm just sharing my screen again, sorry. According to me, electromagnetic testing should be the correct way forward. I'm sorry. Yeah. So I'm just playing the slide again. So which means when I'm trying to detect a crack, the best method is not radiography testing. The best method is not UT shear wave testing. The best method, if it is on the surface, or if it is on the surface, PT. If it is on the subsurface, it is MT. And the other way that you can find is using eddy current testing, where you have to have specialized electromagnetic testings, where you have to use specialized probes on the OD of the shaft, and that will give you maximum probability of detecting such cracks. This is just a hunch, but it requires a lot of physical verification of such cracks. You have to have a known defect with the crack and make sure that the equipment is able to detect that crack before you want to implement it on an unknown component.
Yeah. So I think can you tell, I mean, who's SMG?
Yeah, this is Santosh from here.
Santosh from?
I'm from here. Hello, this is Santosh from Fiat.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. The same because we also did a eddy current testing, but we're not able to find out the exact location of crack. So
Okay.
finally, what we did a macro etching and the biggest section of that part find out with the project, and then that location maximum material was going. So we decided to concentrate on that area, and but continuously it's not happening. Now that crack percentage was high at that time, but now we're with a lesser quantity by controlling it by at machining it. But we're not able to get it in zero.
You are from
Actually,
which? Yeah. You are from which industry, by the way? I'm sorry.
I'm from Fiat, not a Fiat, I'm from automobile industry, sir.
Okay, automobile, Fiat. Okay, with Rege, Anand Rege. Okay, fine.
The point here is any crack for that metal, it doesn't stay on one plane. So if I were to macro etch a particular layer and try to find out, I'll only find a dot there, but it will actually be a crack which is running its roots deep inside the surface. So any erosion method or destructive method will not be the right way forward. What I would suggest is, if you have a known block which for sure has cracks in it, then you have to have that as a sacrificial sample, and then choose any of this NDT method that is able to detect that crack. And once you are very sure, and if you are repeatably able to get that defect, and only then you can go and do it on your unknown component. So that is how we usually deal with such things. UT as such, since you say it's a shaft, it's going to have a curvature. So most technicians will not be able to take into count the curvature or the radius of the surface. So which will again reduce the probe contact, and which is not the right way forward. So you might have to have a shoe on the UT probe, which will sit on the contour of the shaft, and then give you a proper surface contact with the metal to actually detect such cracks. So I would recommend you to have a sacrificial sample, and then choose an NDT method which is able to detect that crack.
Okay, please. You suggest to
Mr.
go with the
Joel,
electromagnetic eddy current, right?
just one clarification
Yeah.
regarding certification of competence, that SNTTC 1A,
Okay.
does it allow trainer to be examiner of same course?
No. Examiner should be different from the trainer. It can't be the same person.
But what is the practice in India? Trainer is becoming examiner, and that conflict of interest is not getting addressed.
Yeah, see, I don't want to comment on what's being done, but the point is, S&T is very specific, you know, even
Is
with the
it
questions.
is it specifically mentioning trainer cannot be examiner?
Yes, yes, very much. It
Yes.
is documented very clearly in SNTC. It says trainer cannot conduct or, you know, be a part of the examination. It has to be conducted independently. You know, it's very specific. SNTC says how many questions you should ask. You know,
Those things are clear.
Yeah.
Trainer versus examiner. That practice in India, what is going on,
Mhm.
trainer conducts the examination, gives 100% result because that's to show the training has been effective. I just wanted to, in your practice, do you approve such certification?
We right away reject such things because, you know, if a person has to sign and also sign his training certificate and the certificate, it obviously is like saying I am the culprit. So why do we want to accept such certificates? We'll right away reject it. It has
SNTTC 1A, SNTTC 1A is employer-based certification. That certificate needs to be signed by examiner as well as the employer. Do you insist
Correct.
for that? I am not seeing, I am seeing many certificates signed by
Yeah.
examiner, employer. It is employer-based certification.
No,
Employer
it
has to
doesn't
sign.
mandate, no, it doesn't mandate the employer to sign. Only the examiner needs to sign.
Then how do we know whether it's a employer-based certification?
Mhm.
It is not central certification.
Correct. So the point
Anyway,
here
this,
is,
this
yeah,
issue is being discussed at national level. Okay.
yeah. It's as deliberations all over the world. But S&T is very clear. They have, you know, said that employer need not have information about the NDT of the company. He might have head another division or he might have several divisions. So he has no part in certification. That is why he designates a level 3 who will conduct the training and an independent examiner who will conduct the exam. So as far
Yeah.
certificate is concerned, examiner's signature is enough.
Then the employer can take the services of external level 3
Yeah,
for a
he
training, but same
Yes.
trainer becomes the examiner. That is the problem.
Uh, that's something that SNTC clearly forbids us to do.
That
Yes,
needs to be discouraged. Okay.
correct.
Thank you. Very nice presentation.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, very nice presentation. Once again, I would thank you for joining us at very last moment, you know, I would say, because generally we do this every Saturday, but 8-10 days before we generally suggest lecture and all that. So this time we could not do that, but still there were a lot of people present. So it is, it looks it's very sought after topic. So definitely we will look for another one, which could be specific to some one of the processes. So thank you very much. Thank you once again, and thank you all participants. So signing off from Mumbai. Good night to all. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
And
Night.
yeah,
Good
good
night.
weekend. Yeah.
Good night. Good night to all.
Thanks, Vivek ji.